You believe you're familiar with Patrick Swayze, the stunning dancer, the romantic lead, and the unforgettable face of films like Dirty Dancing and Ghost. However, a man fought a silent but brutal battle behind the fame. The powerful appearance and the irresistible charisma. They weren't what he had requested, but he was extremely demanding when they arrived. How Patrick Swayze refused to die in silence, dealt with a devastating diagnosis, and found solace in love in the hours leading up to his death are the true untold story of his final hours. Join me as we explore his final days and the profound impact of his words, which resonate deeply within us. Prior to his fall, Patrick Swayze was the most famous person on the planet. Patrick Swayze was well on his way to heroism before news of his pancreatic cancer broke. He may not have come from a famous acting family, but he always looked at home on screen. Houston, Texas was Patrick's hometown. His cowboy father and dancer mother were his parents. He would be forever changed by this combination of resiliency and attractiveness. In a town that reveled in categorization, he defied easy classification. He had training in classical ballet and traditional dance, and he was also an emotionally intelligent artist. Alternately, was he a ruggedly handsome American leading man who spoke with a southern drawl? Attractive to many, he possessed both qualities. His breakthrough came with the 1987 release of Dirty Dancing. The performance of Patrick Swayze as Johnny Castle was monumental, and nobody anticipated the enormous success of a low-budget dance film. Men aspired to be more like him, women adored him, and teenagers attempted to support each other in swimming pools for decades following his death. He was more than simply a handsome man with impressive dancing skills, though. Following that, he portrayed the sensitive role of Ghost, which demanded that he be vulnerable, hurt, and repress his emotions. He received a Golden Globe nomination for his performance in the film, which was a smashing success at the time. Swayze had become more than just a financially successful actor. He was proving to be an emotionally raw and serious performer. He became famous in the 80s and 90s for being energetic, quiet, and powerful. His characters in Point Break were thrill seekers, while in City of Joy he portrayed the downtrodden. He never let his fame weaken him. He would often perform his own stunts, put in long hours at the gym, and keep quiet about his struggles. Even in Hollywood, he maintained the self-control he developed in dance class and the grit he acquired in Texas. This man was completely master of his own life. Because of this, the subsequent events were particularly horrific. The downfall was not caused by a failed job or a tabloid story. Compared to anything he had encountered in Hollywood before, that creature was more bizarre, sinister, and vicious. The first warning that something terrible was about to happen that shocked Hollywood came slowly at first. Initially, it was somewhat painful, like a little ache in the belly. It wasn't a huge concern if you were in your mid-50s and had a physically demanding job. Patrick speculated that it could have been a pulled muscle, anxiety, or gastrointestinal issues. However, the discomfort persisted. As the night wore on, the agony intensified. It was sharp, persistent, and wouldn't subside. He was advised by Elisa to seek medical assistance. Ultimately, he succeeded. Everything changed abruptly as scheduled scans became urgent ones and blood tests became biopsies. Fourth stage pancreatic cancer. It's among the most perilous diseases in contemporary research. Many refer to pancreatic cancer as the silent killer due to the fact that it remains undetected until it has metastasized to vital organs. It had made its way to Patrick's liver already. The doctors cut to the chase. The tumor contained an incurable form of cancer. It wasn't even feasible in the conventional sense. It was practically guaranteed that it would occur, not merely highly unlikely. 3 to 6 months is about how long most people make it through this. Their lifespan is severely limited for many of them. No need to explain how awful it would have been for the majority of people to hear such news. On the other hand, Patrick was unique. He kept his head up and asked, what are we going to do about it after hearing the news rather than giving up? Lisa, his wife and longtime partner and best friend, was standing by his side. They both entered combat mode simultaneously. What they really needed was time, and they were willing to wait for days, weeks, or months instead of miracles. Stanford University Medical Center conducted a clinical trial that showed promise. A team of researchers experimenting with vitalinib was led by Dr. George Fisher. The goal of this substance is to starve tumors to death by preventing them from forming new blood vessels. The FDA was not on board with it. There was no guarantee that it would be successful. It was still something. Plus, Patrick was fighting for a cause. He yearned for more than simply more time. He yearned to regain control of his life. His drive would sustain him for a longer period than anticipated. One final epic battle. Once again, Patrick returned to the set. The months of January, February, and March passed. Patrick was administered vitalinib as a component of his experimental treatment. The risk of adverse effects was also uncertain. He was ill and exhausted. He was teleported to an uncharted territory, but he never skipped a dosage. He was certain of everything. Nobody ever asked him how he was doing, and he never once brought up the fact that he was exhausted or hurt. Speaking to everyone, Patrick declared, "I'm a miracle, dude." On April 2, 2008, he returned to Stanford for another scan to monitor his body's reaction. Surprisingly, the outcomes appeared promising. He did not have any newly formed liver sores. They all had different metabolic rates. There had been no further spread of the pancreatic tumor. For the time being, it was sufficient that he was standing and fighting, even though he was far from healed. To him, the most significant outcome of that moment was the reestablishment of his freedom to live. He wasted no time at all. Patrick signed on to star in The Beast in September, barely a few months after his diagnosis made headlines. The crime thriller would shoot in Chicago and feature long days, tough lines, and physically demanding sequences. To suggest it was dangerous would be disparaging. The network's upper echelons were on edge. There were inquiries from the insurance company. However, Patrick was ever present. No body doubles for him. He fully grasped the meaning. He gave it his all. Aesthetics had no role. Work was completely unrelated. Defiantly demonstrate that he still had some juice left in the tank. He put in long hours, 14 to 16 hours, 5 days a week. During the breaks between scenes, he would visit the hospital for treatment. They probably would have resigned. No one could hold him responsible. However, Patrick failed to see the significance of his IV drip and instead focused on the task at hand, as he believed that working was an integral aspect of his rehabilitation. He had a point. Why? Because he wasn't a patient all through that time. Once again, he intended to perform. He was determined to stay one step ahead of time. With every scene he shot and line he said, pain, pride, and an underlying desire to quit were all visible from behind the screen. On screen, Patrick Swayze was just as powerful and pointed as before. However, the actual conflict was transpiring in the background. Every morning, he faced the formidable challenge of getting out of bed. He acted courageously, not because he had any inner strength, but because he saw no other way out. He would take herbal tea to relax, apply his own makeup while trembling, and then walk onto the set as if nothing was wrong. The performance was a show within a show. However, cancer is highly effective at eroding. Physical pain isn't the only thing that hurts. Dishonor, individuality, and self-esteem are all negatively impacted. Patrick had spent his entire life establishing his reputation through physical strength, self-control, and movement. This illness was the worst possible thing that could have happened to him. A thinning of his hair, dulling of his eyes, and slowing of his gait were all symptoms of aging. He had a feeling he had lost even before he saw the mirror confirm it. However, he refused to be treated like a patient by anyone. Producers proposed rescheduling filming to accommodate his chemotherapy fatigue, but he adamantly declined. "I'll let you know when I can't do it anymore," he added. That day never came because he never gave it permission to. However, the anguish persisted when concealed by pride. According to his friends, he would occasionally sneak off set for brief periods of time during scenes, either to vomit or to collect himself. Upon his return, a smile spread across his face. That perpetually beams. You could always count on hearing that one word, "Let's go." If you listened carefully, it revealed everything. While a break-in was underway, Patrick's longtime friend discovered him slumped over in his caravan, curled up like a child. Sweat soaked his clothing. Despite his visibly trembling body, he remained silent. "Just hold my hand," he replied. "I need assistance." He didn't say. He was not losing his mind, just someone to accompany him. Not in a helping or healing capacity, but simply being present. Before this, Patrick had never been seen by the world in such a way. At that very moment, all he needed was an embrace, even though he had the ability to speak to millions. After the curtain fell, the cancer returned even more resolute than before. It was far from finished. As Patrick's health deteriorated, the mask came off. The beast had been discovered, and Patrick could no longer remain hidden. Certainly not from the general public, the media, or cancer itself. Both his health and his life took a dramatic turn in January 2009. It wasn't long after the show ended that Patrick was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with asthma. Asthmatics may need to stay in bed for at least a week. However, it could be fatal for someone whose immune system had been destroyed by chemotherapy. Because of the illness, everyone was on high alert. Until now, Patrick had managed to keep the backstory of his fight out of the spotlight. Photographs of his slender frame, his contracted lips, and the oxygen tube revealed the truth, though. The illness was victorious. Patrick persisted in discussing potential next steps despite the fact that his strength was dwindling and his lungs were failing. Doing nothing was a word he couldn't find. His physicians recommended an unusual combination of the powerful chemotherapy medications Abraxane and GMCAR, which are not yet approved for use in most settings. It posed a risk. There were worries regarding potential toxins, adverse effects, and the overall efficacy, but Patrick was unfazed. In an instant, he gave the go-ahead. The treatment was appalling. The beginning of his hair loss was more painful for him than anyone could have imagined. In all that he did, Patrick had always acted with dignity and presence. There was more to his hair loss than meets the eye. It was clear from that sign that the battle was far from over. He maintained his dignity by publicly donning hats. Even though it was painful for him, he continued to practice smiling. But his weight loss was substantial. He turned pale and sank into it. It became unbearable to traverse even modest distances. Regardless of his exhaustion and illness, he persisted in trying to stay active. He fantasized about his future roles while riding horses, watching films, and chatting with others. However, his physique had transformed. It had stopped functioning. His loved ones could tell he wasn't quite himself because of his slurred speech, subtle bewilderment, and occasional sideways glances. He was no longer limited to stomach and liver cancer. It appeared all over. His once sacred shrine had become his corpse on the battlefield. Its momentum was dwindling. Then Patrick decided. Getting back home was the next step. Riding horses and facing the brutal reality on the final journey home. After enduring the mayhem of Hollywood and the clinical precision of hospitals, Patrick Swayze finally broke free in April 2009. Lisa and he returned to their sprawling California ranch where the land is adorned with hills and horses. The ranch was where Patrick was most comfortable. It was at that moment that time seemed to stand still once more. Not once did he mention that it meant giving up. He referred to it as returning to the fundamentals. They had always felt secure on their land. The sound of horses hoofing on dirt, long evening porch rides, and watching the sun set over the fields. To them, It served as a form of therapy. For Patrick, it was more than just a place to live. Yes, it was he. Now, though, things were different. He had lost a lot of weight, and his former physique, due to the chemotherapy, he was weak, and his muscles had deteriorated. Even mounting a horse became a challenge. On occasion, he would merely observe them from the edge of the fence. It was all Lisa was responsible for maintaining the property, preparing his meals, administering his medication, and staying up all night to alleviate his increasing pain. As he walked away from her, she watched the man she had loved since they were teenagers. Regardless, she made sure he never felt like he was leaving. Patrick clung to the illusion of normalcy for as long as he could. He would occasionally smile for photos while wearing his wig around guests. Sitting up straight, he fought the urge to doze off. He made an effort to crack jokes, as usual, but they were snarky and uninspired. However, his stamina was rapidly dwindling. Is that all? They were moving swiftly behind. In their pursuit of the ideal photo op, the paparazzi set up shop close to the estate. Sees Patrick, unrefined and unfinished. Finally, they understood. Several images depicted Patrick and Lisa taking leisurely strolls. He seemed much older than his 57 years, with a bony and weathered appearance. Words like unrecognizable and wasting away were used towards the end of the sad headlines. They failed to notice the intimacy that existed in private, though. The late-night chats, the victories like getting out of bed on his own, or the moments of silence when Lisa sat silently by his side. Words were superfluous right now. Despite his exhaustion, Patrick was prepared for what lay ahead. The tempest he'd been attempting to evade for the past 2 decades had finally arrived. The final hours of the day he surrendered. It was by the end of August that Patrick's health had deteriorated significantly. Inconsolable tremors, high body temperature, and excessive fatigue were the telltale signs. One day he had a dangerously high fever and heart rate, and he passed out. The frightening results of the blood tests revealed the following: extremely low sodium levels, excessive calcium levels, hemorrhage from the stomach, and a near complete absence of white blood cells. In addition to weakening, his body was also slowing down. He was whisked away to Cedars-Sinai by Lisa, but this time there were no fresh challenges or expectations. Unfortunately, on September 9th, a doctor informed them, "There's nothing else we can do." Repeat, everybody hates hearing that. Patrick returned home for the final time that evening. Lisa recounted the events leading up to Patrick's passing in an interview that took place in 2011. Reportedly, she stated, "I can't keep this secret anymore." Lisa related the events that transpired during Patrick's final days. The house was silent. There was a heavy mist. The once active man now spent much of his time bedridden, having lost his ability to dance on stage and in film. His bones, organs, and nerves were all affected by these tumors. The agony lingered. The option of morphine had been removed. Just keeping him awake was all that was required. Lisa served as his nurse. In reality, she cautiously adjusted the dosage of the Dilaudid she gave him in an effort to alleviate his pain without putting him to sleep. Patrick denied drug use for as long as he could muster up the willpower to do so. He was willing to endure any hardship in order to be there. Eric, Lisa's brother, and Mary, his wife, paid a visit on September 11th. The house seemed to be devoid of vitality. Patrick came and went all the time. For an instant, though, clarity returned. In a low voice, he spoke to Lisa as he faced her. "I love you." Lisa whispered, "I love you too." Little did they know that those were their final words spoken to each other. It's done. Nothing flashy or extravagant, simple, unadulterated truth. Patrick slept for 2 days after that. His breathing became shallower. As the hours passed, his already feeble physique grew even more motionless. The following day, at 10 o'clock IMM, On September 14, Lisa noticed a change when she sat next to him. After a long, final gasp and a deep breath, there was complete stillness. Donnie Seas was searching for anything when he hurried in, but it had ended. No one from Seas was present. Still, he didn't venture out on his own or without affection. His departure was unaltered. He did it with dignity, courage, and a helping hand. After the silence, betrayal, gossip, and devotion are all tested. Following Patrick Swayze's passing, the ranch fell into a state of relative silence. The fields continued to be traversed by the horses, but the trees still carried a faint whisper of wind. However, upon entering the house, nothing was found. Suddenly, Lisa was surrounded by noise. She had recently lost her partner of 34 years. The sound is more like whispers than the sound of mourning. It didn't take long for the papers to arrive. Several reports surfaced on news sites such as Radar Online, claiming that Lisa had caused harm to Patrick during his final months of life. According to anonymous sources, they experienced emotional neglect or abuse. A woman who prevented him from receiving medication and who oversaw the narrative surrounding his demise was depicted in the artwork. Those who were actually present at the time described it as hideous, shocking, and completely fictional. In order to protect Lisa, her loved ones moved swiftly and forcefully. Medical records that are reviewed by third-party specialists, such as Richard Hunter's account, was drastically different. Great care was always extended to Patrick, but on occasion, it was extraordinary. We alleviated every ache and pain. Every issue has been resolved. Careful preparation and execution went into each and every doctor's appointment. There was no evidence of abuse or neglect, according to Dr. Hunter, who publicly stated after reviewing Patrick's records personally, he went so far as to say that the constancy and devotion of Patrick's carers were the only reasons he lived nearly 20 months after his diagnosis. Lisa gave them precisely that. Lisa was described as Patrick's guardian angel by those who knew him well during his final months. When he was in too much pain to sleep, she did all the cooking, cleaning, keeping track of doses, communicating with doctors, and staying up all night. Rumors about famous people's deaths continue long after their bodies have been laid to rest. If the story isn't told truthfully, scandals can easily fill the void and shape the plot. However, Lisa's support from those who were aware of the situation never wavered. Everyone who knew Patrick, his former co-workers, friends, and even Donnie Seas said the same thing, that his final chapter was not about betrayal, but about unbreakable love. And as he had demonstrated throughout his life and death, love was paramount. How came he managed to live for so long? He triumphed over cancer. Upon learning that Patrick Swayze had cancer, even his doctors were prepared for the worst. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, particularly when it has metastasized to the liver, is considered fatal by medical standards. 3 months is the most common duration, with 6 months being considered lucky. Pat lived for 20 years. Why was that the turning point? Although the clinical trial and the new medications were factors, other specialists, such as Dr. Richard Hunter, argue that they weren't the only ones. The combination of these 3 powerful factors allowed him to live longer than the average person. His physical appearance was the first. A lot of suffering and difficult times had befallen Patrick. His physique was slender, powerful, and unexpectedly tough. He had honed it as a dancer and athlete. He was more disciplined and had a strong heart and lungs than most Olympic hopefuls. He was able to endure cancer treatments that would have killed most people because he had been challenging himself for years, which gave him a special resilience. The second was having easy access to first-rate healthcare. After Patrick realized something was wrong, he refused to take the conventional approach. He had no trouble contacting anyone at the study office at Stanford University. When the Vitalinib study opened, he was among the first participants. Modern cancer research teams kept a careful eye on him, and he eventually had access to combinations of GMSR and Abraxane that other patients couldn't afford. Fighting wasn't something he did impulsively, he was accompanied by medical weapons. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, he had to consider his own attitude. The difficulty of the task was secondary to the clarity of its objective. Patrick vowed to work hard, love deeply, and push himself to his limits until he was exhausted. He would not budge from his stance on being called terminal. He spoke highly of himself. What it meant to survive changed because he refused to play the victim card. His sharp mind served him well, and it inspired others around him. He ought to have left months ago, according to friends, nurses, and doctors, but he persisted in coming back, being Lisa's rock in life, at work, and beyond. On occasion, simply being present is all it takes to keep us going. Not your average movie star, this is Patrick Swayze in his natural element. Popular culture makes Patrick Swayze's roles as the stunning dance instructor, the enigmatic spirit seeker, and the daring surfer easy to recall. Still, he was so much more than what he appeared on screen. His true identity emerged once the cameras stopped rolling. Not every moment was a joy for Patrick. He battled substance abuse in the 90s. He checked into a rehabilitation center without the media scrutiny that follows a high-profile breakdown. He quietly went about his recovery after admitting he was mistaken and accepting responsibility. Even though there were setbacks and mistakes, forward movement was constant. Tragedies he endured in his personal life also rarely made headlines. Death of his father, Jesse, in 1982 was a devastating blow to him. His heart broke and their nights were haunted for years after he and Lisa suffered a miscarriage. He kept these wounds hidden from public view, but they provided the silent fortitude he needed to battle cancer. His marriage followed. While most Hollywood love stories end in heartbreak, Patrick and Lisa's was unusual in that it lasted. They have been a couple for over 30 years after meeting when they were teenagers and getting married at a young age. Their relationship was far from ideal. It was real, but there isn't actually one. They had an argument, drifted apart, and then reconciled. The one constant in his life, though, was Lisa. If you asked Patrick what kept him grounded in interviews, he would never mention fame or money. Concerning her, he spoke. Particularly during his illness, their bond extended beyond the sexual. Considerations of sentiment, religion, and logistics were involved. She supported him, cared for him, and even held him down. No matter what, Patrick never forgot his roots. He never lost his modesty or his fidelity to his Texas heritage. When asked where he got the self-control that guided his life, he frequently cited his mother. He kept in touch with the shy, ordinary man who was hiding behind his star even after he became famous all over the globe. Despite his fame, his roles as a husband and leader were more significant. Even though he knew he was dying, he remained gracious. This took courage. What remains of Patrick Swayze are the lives he touched and the way he departed from this world. Finally, this is the legacy that Patrick left behind. Patrick Swayze's final performance was touching and genuine in a society where famous people are idolized and perfection is sought after. In those final moments, we can perceive the true purpose of his entire journey: to establish connections with others. Patrick met his demise with an attitude of gratitude and grace. His story is so impactful because of that he did it independently is what matters the most. Even though his films continue to touch audiences long after they've played, his influence extends much beyond that. It's not limited to red carpet events or award ceremonies. He proved it by persevering through exhaustion, smiling through pain, fighting when he was exhausted, and clinging to love when all around him crumbled. In the lesson he unintentionally imparted to all of us: death need not be a negative thing. That farewells can be lovely. Such strength isn't necessarily audible. I love you is whispered occasionally before it stops. Leave a comment telling us which Patrick Swayze moment is your favorite. Please return next time. Thank you for tuning in.